She was told, loud enough for the entire boardroom to hear. "This isn't a fashion show, sweetheart. It's business. Try dressing like you belong next time." No one laughed. No one stopped him. She didn't argue. She just stood there, adjusting the very jacket they mocked, while her access was revoked, her emails were blocked, and security was quietly summoned to escort her out. Not because she was late, not because she was loud, but because she was a black woman who dared to walk into power wearing confidence on her sleeve. What they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that the woman they pushed out of a room would soon own the entire building. You're about to witness a true story of humiliation, sabotage, and the most poetic corporate revenge you'll ever see. But not the vengeful kind. The strategic kind. The kind that rewrites legacy with receipts. So don't blink. Don't skip. Because once you find out who she really is, you won't believe how deep the disrespect went, or how far she rose in return. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. And tell us, what would you have done in her place? If this story has you hooked already, hit like, subscribe, and stay locked in. What happens next changes everything. The sun hovered just above the high-rise skyline of Midtown Manhattan, casting long shadows over the sleek glass walls of Bell Ridge Enterprises, a Fortune 500 tech investment conglomerate housed in one of the city's most prestigious towers. The morning hum buzzed beneath the marble floors and gold-trimmed elevators as professionals in press suits and polished shoes filed into the grand lobby. Among them walked Danielle Moore, tall, poised, with skin like burnished bronze and eyes that carried both strength and serenity. Danielle cut a striking figure in a tailored black jumpsuit with a cinched waist, a statement belt, and ankle boots that spoke more of creative brilliance than corporate rigidity. Her hair was pinned in a smooth chignon, and in her hand, she carried a leather folio marked with her initials, DM. Her outfit was fashion-forward, sure, sleek, and powerful, not a thread out of place. She walked with intention, her invitation clasped inside the folio. Board Summit Access, Executive Guest Danielle Moore. But as she approached the private elevator leading to the 54th floor executive boardroom, she was stopped, not by a malfunctioning keycard, not by a scheduling mistake, but by a man in a navy uniform who stepped in front of her like a wall. His name tag read Carl. He wore dark glasses even indoors and bore the expression of someone who considered judgment a job requirement. "Ma'am," Carl said, lips pursed, "I'm going to need to see your clearance." Danielle blinked, already extending her badge and the official printed invitation she had received 3 weeks prior. She had been invited as a prospective innovation partner, a rising fashion tech entrepreneur whose AI-powered retail algorithm had been making waves. This summit was the next step, the moment her world would finally converge with the global players who shape the future. "Here you go," she replied with measured calm. Carl gave the documents a cursory glance, then squinted at her, lowering his glasses just enough to make the scrutiny obvious. "Yeah, we've had issues with guests showing up at the wrong level. You'll need to go through a secondary check." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "This is the executive summit floor," she said. "My name is on the list." "Sure," he replied, waving over another guard. "But you're not really dressed for boardroom protocol, are you?" Her brows twitched, not quite a frown, more a flicker of controlled disbelief. "Excuse me. You might want to check with guest relations," he said with a half smirk. "This floor is for executives. I'm sure they can help redirect you." A few feet away, a white man in a plaid sports jacket, khakis, and visibly stained tie shuffled past unbothered. He gave a friendly nod to Carl. "Morning." "Morning, Mr. Bray," Carl responded brightly. Danielle saw it, felt it, that sudden air of implied exclusion, the unspoken rules that shifted depending on who you were, not what you carried. She exhaled slowly, suppressing the tension curling through her spine. "You didn't question him." Carl shrugged. "Mr. Bray's a regular. Known entity." Danielle opened her folio again and pointed to the gold-stamped seal of Bell Ridge Enterprises. "This isn't a fake invite." Carl nodded like he understood, but his eyes didn't move. "That's not the issue," he said, almost too smoothly. "It's just protocol." When Danielle refused to step aside, another guard joined the scene. This one was younger, quieter, but not more helpful. "Ma'am," he said, Please allow us to inspect your bag." She blinked. "Are you serious? It's a security precaution." Danielle had seen this before at luxury malls, five-star hotels, airport lounges. But never here. Never at the summit where she was meant to be. With all eyes in the lobby beginning to glance their way, Danielle slowly handed over her bag. They examined every zipper, every pocket, every item, as if they expected to uncover contraband. People around her whispered, speculated, judged. When they found nothing, as expected, they returned it wordlessly. But by then, the 10 a.m. board meeting had already begun. "I'll have to walk you over to the public access lounge," Carl muttered, not meeting her eyes now. Danielle didn't move. Her pulse was steady but sharp, her mind cataloging every detail. "I'm here to pitch a cross-industry integration project. Your company reached out to me," she said. Carl shrugged. "That's not my department." With a deep breath, Danielle took her bag, turned around, and walked, not toward the public lounge, not toward the exit, but straight to the elevator. She scanned her badge again. This time, someone inside must have overridden the system. The door opened. As she entered, Carl called after her, "Ma'am, you're not authorized for," but the elevator doors closed. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored panel. Calm, precise, unapologetically her. She fixed a stray strand of hair and whispered softly to herself, "Let them find out the hard way." The summit had begun without her, but it wouldn't end without her name echoing in every room. The elevator opened directly onto the 54th floor, a hallway lined with abstract art and silent tension. Danielle stepped out with the same composure that had carried her through countless investor meetings and fashion tech expos across continents. But the sting of what had just happened in the lobby still clung to her. She had learned how to armor herself with silence when necessary, but nothing truly dulled the edge of being told, without words, that you didn't belong. At the end of the hallway, floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the boardroom, a gleaming, modern space filled with navy suits, brushed chrome, and the muted power games of industry leaders. A discreet plaque read, "Belridge Board Summit Executives and Strategic Partners Only." Danielle pushed open the door with quiet confidence. A few heads turned, one or two raised eyebrows. She moved with grace toward the long table, her heels clicking against the polished concrete like punctuation marks. She was halfway to her assigned seat when a voice sliced through the room. "Ah," said Travis Kingsley, CEO of Belridge Enterprises, rising from his chair as if to welcome a guest, though the smirk on his face made it clear it wasn't a welcome. "Ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't aware we'd be hosting a fashion show before breakfast." A few chuckles echoed, hesitant and hollow. Danielle paused, her expression unreadable, her fingers tightening slightly around her folio. Travis tilted his head, gesturing lazily toward her. "Nice jacket. Very avant-garde," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Though next time, Ms. Moore, you might consider something a little more aligned with boardroom etiquette. This is a business summit, not Paris Fashion Week." Danielle didn't flinch. She turned to face him, standing tall. "Thank you for the unsolicited critique, Mr. Kingsley," she replied smoothly. "Though I must say, innovation often begins where conformity ends." A beat of silence. Someone at the far end of the table coughed awkwardly. Travis's smirk stiffened just slightly, then faded into indifference as he sat back down, waving a hand toward the agenda. Danielle took her seat beside a balding man who introduced himself in a whisper as Julian Ward, a regional partner from the Boston office. He offered a tight smile, clearly aware of the dynamics at play, but unwilling to get involved. As the first segment of the summit began, a panel discussion on integrated tech strategies. Danielle listened closely, occasionally taking notes, occasionally scanning the faces in the room. She noticed who spoke with authority and who deferred, who leaned forward and who leaned away when she contributed. During a short coffee break, Danielle stepped into the corner near the buffet table to refill her cup when a voice behind her, syrupy and sharp, broke the air. "Hey y'all," said a woman in a perfectly fitted gray suit with diamond studs in her ears and a badge that read Lauren Wells, Chief Communications Officer. Her southern accent was exaggerated, theatrical. Ain't this the fanciest little boardroom you ever did see? Danielle turned, arching one brow. Lauren grinned, the smile never reaching her eyes. Sorry, she said, tapping her lips with a manicured finger. Couldn't help myself. I just adore the way you talk. So expressive. Not something we usually hear around here. Meaning? Danielle asked, voice flat. Oh, nothing bad, honey, Lauren said with mock innocence, flipping her straightened hair over her shoulder. It's just, a certain tone. It stands out. I'm sure you'll find your rhythm. We've all had to adjust to the culture here. Corporate life has its own dialect. Danielle took a slow sip of her coffee. Interesting. I always thought results were more important than accents. Lauren smiled wider, but it was all teeth. Of course. Though fitting in helps too, especially when dealing with legacy clients. You'll get the hang of it if you're planning to stick around. Danielle smiled politely, her eyes sharp as steel. Don't worry. I tend to leave a lasting impression. She walked away before Lauren could respond, her step steady, her heart colder. She returned to the boardroom just as the next session began, but the tone had shifted. Her presence was now a source of curiosity and quiet derision. Several times, when she spoke, she noticed side glances and smirks exchanged between executives. One man whispered to another, chuckling behind a raised hand. Another woman leaned toward Lauren and whispered something. Then both stifled laughter when Danielle began presenting her slide deck. She could feel their eyes scanning her like she was on display, not for her intelligence, but as a spectacle, an outsider in their carefully manicured world. But she didn't let it show. Instead, she focused on her pitch, adaptive algorithms for real-time consumer behavior modeling, a seamless blend of AI, fashion, and commerce. It was a project backed by data, case studies, and 6 international pilot programs, all successful. Yet when she finished, the room was silent for half a beat too long. Then Travis leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Very passionate delivery, he said with a bland smile. Though I wonder how scalable your model truly is in a legacy corporate structure like ours. We've already scaled across 3 regions, Danielle replied. The question is whether legacy structures can evolve fast enough to stay relevant. That earned a few stiffened backs and narrowed eyes. Travis raised his brow, but said nothing. As the moderator moved to the next speaker, Danielle sat back, fingers steepled under her chin. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to make a point. Still, the murmurs, the glances, the under-the-breath chuckles, they clung to the air like smoke. Not everyone in the room was laughing, though. A few faces wore the look of silent respect. One young strategist jotted notes every time she spoke. Another woman across the room, an operations director named Sasha Chen, nodded along more than once. But for now, they remained quiet, perhaps calculating the safest moment to voice support. Danielle knew better than to expect applause from a room this threatened by disruption. She had walked into that boardroom armed with credentials and creativity, but in their eyes, her presence alone was an act of defiance. And while she had managed to keep her seat at the table, it was clear the battle had only just begun. By the time the 3rd session concluded, the boardroom had emptied into smaller breakouts, scheduled across the floor inside conference rooms named after Ivy League institutions, Cambridge, Princeton, Yale, and so on. Danielle, having received a printed schedule from the summit coordinator earlier that morning, was meant to present her second module at 2:15 p.m. in Princeton Room Executive Collaborations. She double-checked her agenda, gathered her materials, and made her way toward the West Wing. But halfway down the corridor, she was stopped by a sharply dressed intern holding a tablet and a strained smile. "Ms. Moore?" he asked, polite but hesitant. "Yes," she answered, instantly sensing the shift in energy. "I'm sorry," he began, "but the Princeton room is currently undergoing emergency maintenance. Something with the ventilation. We've reassigned your session to another space. Just a temporary adjustment." Danielle raised a brow. "Where exactly?" The intern smiled tighter, then pointed down the service hallway. "Room B12, he said. "Same equipment. We've routed everyone accordingly." Danielle followed the narrow hallway, her heels echoing in a space never meant for public-facing events. The carpet changed to industrial tile. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Room B12 sat at the far end, past supply closets and stacks of box paper towels. When she entered, the stark contrast hit her like a gust of dust. The room smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax. Folding chairs were scattered around a long, dented metal table. There was a single monitor set against a cinder block wall and a dry erase board with faded notes from a facilities meeting weeks ago. She stared at the space, blinking. No branding, no refreshments, no other guests, no welcome signage. This wasn't an auxiliary conference room. It was a repurposed maintenance lounge. She glanced at her watch. 2:12, still 3 minutes. Still time for the mistake to be corrected. She opened her laptop, connected to the building Wi-Fi, and pulled up the slide deck she had prepared. Visuals, performance graphs, pilot data, all meticulously designed for the executive crowd promised to her weeks prior. She waited. 2:20, no one came. 2:25, still empty. At 2:30, she sent an email to the summit coordinator. Subject: Session reassignment/attendance. I was redirected to room B12 for my 2:15 presentation. No guests have arrived, and there was no signage indicating the room change. Please advise. She waited another 10 minutes, watching the cursor spin on her inbox. Nothing. No ping. No alert. No reply. She checked her connection. Strong. Refreshed the inbox. Still nothing. At 2:42, she sent a follow-up to a different contact. Subject: Urgent presentation issue/summit logistics. Still silence. Growing frustrated, she accessed her sent folder to ensure everything had gone through. That's when she noticed it. A banner over her outgoing messages. Message quarantined. Potential spam detected. Her brows furrowed. She opened her email dashboard and saw a red notification she had never seen before. Due to security settings, your recent messages have been automatically routed to quarantine folders. Please contact your system administrator. Her emails, those she had sent to the summit team, to internal points of contact, even to potential collaborators, hadn't been delivered. They had been filtered out, flagged, buried in digital shadows. At first, she thought it was a glitch. Then she remembered something Lauren had mentioned casually over coffee break. Our internal filters are pretty aggressive when it comes to unknown domains. It keeps things clean, you know. Danielle's email had come from her own private business server, not a corporate giant like Salesforce or McKinsey. Not clean enough, apparently. She clicked through system diagnostics, trying to whitelist herself, but the access permissions were locked. She didn't have the admin clearance to bypass the blocks. This wasn't just poor management, it was a digital erasure. She wasn't just unseen, she was unrecognized by the system itself. Danielle sat back in the folding chair, the metal legs screeching against the linoleum as she moved. Her fingers drummed on the table beside her untouched water bottle. The silence in the room was deafening, each second ticking past with the finality of doors quietly closing in her face. She looked at the clock, 3 p.m. Her entire presentation slot had passed, unnoticed. Her eyes narrowed. She hadn't worked 3 years building a proprietary AI fashion algorithm from scratch, hadn't navigated VC pitch rooms, and survived sleepless months of development just to be ghosted by an automated spam filter and rerouted to a janitor's closet. She stood, closed her laptop slowly, and slipped it into her leather bag. When she returned to the main floor, the hallway was buzzing again, executives mingling, exchanging cards, clapping each other on the back like gladiators fresh from the arena. No one looked her way, not even the intern who had redirected her. He was now busy laughing at something Travis had said near the espresso bar, nodding like a loyal soldier. Danielle made her way to the info desk, where a young woman with bright red lipstick and a headset greeted her with forced cheer. "Hi, how can I help?" Danielle leaned in. "I need to speak with whoever's overseeing digital communications for the summit. I believe my credentials were flagged by your system, and it's blocking critical emails." The woman clicked her tablet a few times, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your badge isn't pulling up the right access tier for back-end IT requests. I can try escalating the issue, but there might be a delay. Define delay, Danielle said, voice firm. Well, the woman hesitated. Our summit concludes at 6 p.m. IT operates off-site. They might be able to look into it next week. Danielle stared at her for a long moment. Right. She turned away, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag tightly as she walked back into the crowd. Everyone else continued sipping lattes and talking strategy. No one knew she had just been digitally silenced. Intentionally or not, the result was the same. The room she was promised, the people she was promised, had been replaced with blank walls and folding chairs. Her voice had been reduced to spam, and still nobody had noticed she was gone. But Danielle had noticed everything, and she was already thinking 2 steps ahead. The evening air outside Belridge Tower had grown heavy with the scent of impending rain as Danielle exited the building, her posture straight but her breath tight, the memory of room B12 still pulsing behind her eyes like an insult that hadn't stopped echoing. She didn't wait for a ride. Instead, she walked 3 blocks in silence, replaying every moment of the summit, every locked reply, every silencing maneuver, from the downgraded meeting room to the filtered emails and that intern's forced smile. She didn't cry, didn't rant, didn't even sigh. Instead, she opened her phone and began drafting a letter, not a complaint, but a fact. A precise breakdown of how a strategic partner had been redirected, ignored, digitally muted, and denied access to an audience she had been promised. Her goal wasn't revenge, it was clarity, documentation, evidence. Because power didn't respond to emotion, it responded to receipts. But just as she hit send to forward the letter to her legal consultant and investor liaison, a notification blinked at the top of her screen. Security report issued, incident flagged by Belridge internal surveillance. Danielle tapped it open, brows knitting. The email was auto-generated from a Belridge compliance server, with a timestamp, video clip, and a note at the top that read, Subject: Potential misconduct partner access violation. Security review pending. She blinked. Misconduct? She pressed play. The footage showed her entering the lobby from earlier that day, just after the initial confrontation with Carl. It then cut to a short, silent clip where she appeared to be gesturing emphatically near the executive elevator. Except something was wrong. The angles were skewed. Her words were missing. The footage had no audio and was spliced in strange, jagged transitions. From the edited perspective, it looked like she was raising her voice, even though she hadn't. It looked like she had shoved the door herself, even though Carl had eventually opened it. The next scene in the clip showed her walking into the elevator, but it was slowed down and zoomed strangely on her face, as if searching for something aggressive. The tone was clear. They were trying to paint her as a threat. Danielle's stomach turned, not in fear, but in a deep, bone-cold fury that settled under her skin like steel. She knew this tactic. She had seen it play out on news cycles, in HR memos, in office politics that didn't say what they meant, but always made themselves clear in who they excluded. Within the hour, she received a second email, this time directly from Belridge's legal department. Dear Ms. Moore, effective immediately. Your access credentials have been deactivated pending further internal review. Please be advised that you are not permitted to return to Belridge Properties until the matter has been resolved. This action has been taken to preserve professional standards and safety following your conduct earlier today. We thank you for your cooperation. There was no mention of what she'd actually done. No acknowledgement of the invitation, the presentation, or the fact that she had complied with every request, even the unfair ones. No due process, just exile. She called the coordinator who had invited her. Voicemail. She emailed the communications director. Bounced back. She even reached out to Sasha Chun, the one executive who had seemed quietly supportive during her session, but received a cryptic reply that said, Danielle, I recommend giving it a few days. Things are sensitive right now. Maybe best to step back while the dust settles. Step back? The dust hadn't even begun to rise. Danielle stared at her phone, her reflection distorted in the black glass. Her hands were steady, but her mind moved like clockwork. She knew exactly what had happened. Someone, somewhere in that building had decided she was too much of something, too confident, too different, too disruptive. And now, with a few edits and vague policy jargon, they had pushed her out of the narrative completely. She wasn't just being dismissed. She was being rewritten. The next morning, a blog post appeared on a quiet industry news site. The headline read, "Summit disrupted by guest altercation, insider reports say access protocols breached." There were no names, no specifics, but the photo accompanying the article, blurry, long distance, and taken from the mezzanine level, showed her silhouette entering the executive elevator. Danielle clicked through the article, reading the thinly veiled jabs and veiled speculation. Unregistered attendee accessed restricted level. Escalated tone with security staff. Protocol breach triggered internal review. Not a single source confirmed. Not a single mention of the invitation. And yet the narrative was already moving, sliding through inboxes and LinkedIn feeds, morphing from rumor to perceived fact. She texted Leonard Vaughn, her legal advisor and longtime friend, attaching a clip and a copy of her original invitation. "They're smearing me. I want to go on record before they bury the truth." He called back within 5 minutes, voice calm but low. "They're setting up a paper trail so they can say it's a misunderstanding, not discrimination. It's the oldest trick. Stay quiet and it becomes rumor. React emotionally and they'll call it unstable behavior. You need documentation, leverage, and strategy." "I already have the documentation," Danielle replied. "Now I need a platform." "Then don't play their game," Leonard said. "Redesign the board." Danielle's eyes darkened with focus. She opened her laptop, scrolled through a folder labeled Legacy Investment Potentials, and clicked on a file named Acquisition Targets Phase 2. Her gaze froze on a name in bold, Belridge Enterprises. The line item showed her firm, More Tech Collective, had quietly acquired nearly 18% in options through partner holding firms over the past 9 months. It was the start of a long-term strategic buy-in, designed for silent influence. But maybe it didn't need to stay silent. Not anymore. By the third morning since her removal from Belridge, Danielle opened her inbox to find dozens of new alerts from LinkedIn, industry newsletters, and private investor threads, none of them addressed to her directly, yet all of them whispered the same coded message. A story had dropped in the Ridge Report, Belridge's internal employee newsletter, a publication not intended for the public eye, but circulated to over 4,000 employees globally. The headline read, "Upholding Excellence, When Presence Must Match Purpose." The article, styled as a leadership reflection, didn't mention names, but the tone was unmistakable. It detailed an incident at the recent summit involving a guest who lacked full understanding of Belridge's cultural alignment standards, citing the importance of maintaining a cohesive image of professionalism, and warning of external influencers who mistake innovation for authority. The final paragraph concluded with an ominous call to action. As Belridge continues its mission to lead with precision, we urge all teams to remain vigilant, respectful, and committed to preserving the elevated standards we've built together. Not everyone who enters the room belongs at the table. Danielle read the article twice, then a third time, each line sharpening like glass against her skin. She had become a parable, a cautionary tale, an unnamed threat wrapped in corporate jargon. The article didn't have to name her. Everyone inside Belridge already knew. Screenshots of her profile were circulating in Slack threads and group chats with captions like "That's her." And she really thought she was going to change our model with AI and a trench coat? Others were less subtle. A meme of her standing in the executive elevator had been altered with the text, "When you mistake diversity for a free pass." The worst part wasn't the jokes. It was the silence from those who had once smiled to her face. From Sasha, from Julian, from every passive nod she had once mistaken for quiet respect. Meanwhile, a private group chat among mid-level executives had leaked to Danielle through a sympathetic intern. In the thread, someone had posted a recorded audio clip from the summit, caught not from an official microphone, but from a mobile phone left recording during a private cocktail reception. The voice was unmistakably Travis Kingsley's. In the clip, he could be heard chuckling while recounting the elevator situation to a circle of executives. She walked in like she owned the place, he said, his voice laced with arrogance. Wearing that designer wannabe getup and talking algorithms like she's the next Jeff Bezos. Told Carl to let her through, but I guess she thought inclusion meant an open mic honestly. If you can't dress for the game, don't expect a seat at the table. There was laughter. Then another voice chimed in asking, "So what now?" Travis replied, "Nothing public. Just make sure her name doesn't show up in any new contracts. Quietly close the loop. We've worked too hard for this culture to confuse innovation with disruption." The audio clip was damning, not just for its content, but for its clarity. There was no ambiguity, no way to spin it as a joke out of context. Danielle forwarded it to Leonard immediately. He replied in less than 3 minutes, "This is nuclear. But we have to be smart. If you go public, they'll pivot to protect him and spin you as emotional. We need internal dissent. Find someone inside who's ready to talk." Danielle agreed. But even as she planned her countermove, the Belridge machine was already at work. A memo from the Belridge Media Relations office circulated internally hours after the audio began leaking. The memo read, "Regarding recent misinformation, unauthorized recordings of private conversations are a violation of internal conduct. Any materials circulating that claim to represent Belridge leadership are not verified and should be disregarded. All employees are reminded that audio tampering is a serious legal matter and will be pursued accordingly. Leadership stands firmly against bias of any kind." It was masterful. Denial without denial, apology without responsibility. The real story wasn't being hidden. It was being buried beneath layers of legal posturing and controlled narrative spin. And it was working. Several staffers who had initially reacted with shock began retracting their tweets. One associate publicly posted, "It's irresponsible to share unverified content. We have to let due process take its course." Another wrote, "Leadership is more than sound bites. Belridge has always prioritized growth, not gossip." Danielle watched the narrative shift in real time. Her inbox remained empty. Her name faded from invite lists. Panels she was once scheduled to moderate quietly replaced her with neutral substitutes. A podcast she had pre-recorded with Belridge's Innovation Lab was pulled from the release calendar for strategic realignment. She had been erased, not just from the building, but from their timeline. Yet in the midst of this erasure, her inbox began to receive different kinds of messages. Quiet ones, personal ones. A Belridge data analyst messaged her from a private account. "Danielle, I don't want to be named, but you're not crazy. I ran a query on the mail server metadata. Your email domain was set to quarantine default 18 hours before the summit. That's not random." Another came from an event coordinator. "I didn't know what they were doing until it was too late. You were intentionally rerouted. I found the change request." It came from someone in Travis's office. Piece by piece, the shape of the sabotage became clearer. Not just bias, but deliberate exclusion disguised as policy. Every decision had a name behind it. Every coincidence was an instruction. Danielle compiled every message, every quote, every data flag, and fed it into a private digital vault her firm used for acquisition security. She labeled the folder, Belridge // pattern of intent. She wasn't just documenting anymore. She was preparing. The voices inside Belridge may have turned against her, but what they didn't know was that silence never stopped momentum. It only delayed the crash. The morning of the Belridge annual shareholders assembly arrived with a kind of muted fanfare that only powerful institutions could generate. Luxury sedans lined the curb in front of the company's downtown headquarters. Security teams moved with polite precision through entry points, and a custom logo backdrop stood at the entrance for press photographers capturing board members, equity partners, and executives as they streamed in, shaking hands and exchanging the tight-lipped smiles that disguised corporate calculation. Danielle arrived without a camera crew, without a statement suit, and without a single visible credential on her. Her look was purposefully understated. Dark blazer, soft blouse, minimal makeup, and hair pulled back into a clean, low knot. She didn't need to draw attention, only to get through the door. In her bag was a portfolio marked FTL Holdings, a name no one would associate with her, not yet. The firm had acquired 6.7% of Belridge's Class B stock over the past year, quietly buying through layers of shell firms and minor partners, never enough to make headlines, but just enough to guarantee a voice in the room at the company's highest gathering. Danielle was not there as Danielle Moore, the fashion tech founder, erased from their summit. She was there as legal proxy of record, representing FTL Holdings as its appointed speaker in accordance with Section 4B of Belridge's Equity Participation Bylaws. Every form had been submitted, every document notarized. She was legal, she was entitled, she was prepared, and still, as she approached the sign-in table outside the private conference suite on the 47th floor, she saw the flicker in the receptionist's eyes, the brief tightening of the jaw, the subtle squint at her badge. "Your name, ma'am?" the receptionist asked. "Danielle Moore," she answered, presenting both ID and printed confirmation. "I'm here as proxy for FTL Holdings. You'll find the paperwork is already on file with your investor relations team." The woman tapped her tablet, eyes scanning. Her expression remained unreadable. "One moment," she said, then turned and walked through a side door into the inner chamber. Danielle stood silently. She could see through the frosted glass panels as guests milled about inside the meeting suite. Waiters passed out espresso. A slideshow played on loop above the stage. Her eyes locked on the Belridge seal mounted over the board's dais, polished gold over black stone. She knew that room. She had stood just outside it years ago as a startup hopeful seeking funding. Today, she was there as an owner. But 5 minutes passed, then 10. The receptionist returned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Moore," she said carefully, "but your name doesn't appear on the attendee list for the in-room session. I've been advised to place you in the overflow lounge. You'll be able to watch the proceedings on live feed." Danielle blinked once. "The proxy authorization was confirmed 2 days ago," she said calmly, "and I've already been cleared for active speaking rights on behalf of FTL Holdings." "Yes, ma'am," the receptionist replied, her voice tight. "But there's been a review of credentials this morning, and it seems your proxy designation hasn't been approved for physical access to the live session. We've set up a suite just next door, and you'll still be able to vote through digital interface." "I'm not here to watch," Danielle said, lowering her voice. "I'm here to speak." The receptionist shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, but this directive came from investor relations upstairs." Danielle studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the nearby security officer, who had stepped subtly closer since her arrival. "So I'm being asked to stand outside, despite carrying a verified legal proxy and full shareholder authorization, because someone unnamed has decided to override Belridge protocol?" The receptionist said nothing. Danielle smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Noted," she said. "Please tell your supervisor I'll be in the lounge, temporarily." She turned and walked toward the side suite, her heels clicking steadily. The overflow lounge was tastefully furnished, outfitted with 3 flat-screen monitors, a self-serve bar, and exactly 2 other people, both seated in silence, watching the pre-meeting roll call. Danielle selected a seat in the back corner, pulled out her tablet, and tapped into the secure VPN her legal team had established for the morning. The moment she connected, her dashboard lit up with a cascade of messages. Her assistant had confirmed the most recent proxy validation had been digitally signed by Belridge less than 24 hours earlier. Her lead counsel from Vaughn and Darby had already sent a memo challenging her exclusion from the in-room session. She typed back only 2 words, "Let them." The screen above flickered as the board entered the stage. Travis Kingsley stepped forward, flanked by Lauren Wells and 2 other senior executives. He looked exactly as she remembered, confident, crisp, unbothered. His voice echoed across the feed. "Welcome, valued shareholders. It's a pleasure to host this annual assembly, where transparency and growth remain our highest priorities." Danielle leaned back in her chair, fingers interlaced. She already knew what was coming next. A presentation on quarterly growth, a nod to emerging markets, a slide about future-focused integration, and then Item 4C, a vote on leadership structure and expansion partnership strategy. She wasn't there to challenge the vote. She was there to control the story around it. One click at a time, her team began executing the strategy. A second press release, embargoed until 10:45 a.m., was scheduled to drop mid-meeting. Its headline was simple: FTL Holdings reaffirms commitment to inclusive innovation. Proxy appointed to lead shareholder integration strategy at Belridge. A direct quote from Danielle would appear in paragraph 2, alongside a footnote about her exclusion from the in-room session despite verified access. Then, a third-party tech media outlet would pick up the quote, tying it to Travis's leaked comments from the summit just 1 month prior. Nothing would be illegal. Nothing would be angry. But everything would be traceable. Danielle had learned their game, and now she was rewriting its rules from the outside in. At exactly 10:46 a.m., as Travis Kingsley tapped his fingers on the podium and shifted to the final voting agenda, Resolution 4C, Corporate Integration and Equity Transfer, the overhead screen above him froze mid-slide. The animated bar chart halted, jittered, and was abruptly replaced by a simple black screen with gold serif text that read, "Presented by FTL Holdings Executive Statement." A murmur moved through the boardroom. Travis's brow furrowed. He turned his head slightly toward the AV technician, but the tech was already looking at someone off stage with a blank, confused stare. Before Travis could speak, the lights dimmed, and the video began. The first clip was grainy security footage from Belridge's lobby 3 months earlier. Danielle standing at the executive elevator, calmly presenting her ID while the security guard blocked her path. Then a hard cut, her bag being searched while others walked by untouched. Another cut, Travis at the summit podium, making his now infamous fashion show comment, the smirk playing across his face. Then a new scene, Lauren Wells mimicking Danielle's accent by the coffee station, exaggerated twang and all, as 2 colleagues laughed behind their hands. A subtitle overlay appeared. Hidden bias is still bias. The footage continued, spliced with internal Slack screenshots, emails with her address flagged as spam, and the internal newsletter headline, "Upholding Excellence." A brief audio clip followed. Travis's voice unmistakable as he told the story of Danielle to his inner circle, scoffing at her presence, questioning her place at the table, and laughing about how she had been handled. The laughter from his peers in the background chilled the room to silence. Then the screen cut to black again, and a final line appeared. "This is not disruption. This is ownership." At that moment, the rear doors of the boardroom opened, not loudly, but deliberately. Danielle Moore stepped inside. The silence was instant. No one moved. No one spoke. Her stride was even, her expression unreadable, and her gaze met no one directly. Instead, she moved toward the front. Her badge, now clearly visible, gold-trimmed and stamped with both the FTL Holdings logo and a new title that had not yet been announced. Chair, Strategic Acquisitions, More Tech Collective. Whispers rippled across the rows as Danielle climbed the steps to the main platform, the same space Travis had occupied moments earlier. She stood beside him, then turned slowly to face the shareholders, her voice echoing through the mic with surgical calm. "For those of you who don't know me," she began, "my name is Danielle Moore, and I am the founder and CEO of More Tech Collective, an equity innovation firm that specializes in the integration of AI systems, ethical design, and fashion technology. For the past 14 months, through a combination of private investment partnerships and joint acquisitions, we have been operating under the name FTL Holdings. As of this morning, FTL officially holds 51% of Belridge's controlling equity." Gasps followed. One board member's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk. Another leaned forward as if not trusting his ears. Travis didn't move, but the color drained from his face as Danielle continued. "Let me be clear. This is not a hostile takeover. This is the consequence of leadership that failed to recognize value beyond their comfort zone. This is the result of institutional bias, cloaked in decorum. I was invited into this company once, as a guest. I was blocked, mocked, silenced, and removed. But I didn't come here today as a guest." Her eyes swept the room now, calm but unflinching. I came back as your majority stakeholder." Behind her, the screen changed again, now displaying a clean pie chart showing the updated equity distribution. FTL Holdings holding a thin but decisive lead over Belridge's remaining executive board. Danielle let the silence hold. No one interrupted. No one dared. "Some of you," she said slowly, "might be wondering why I exposed what I did. Why I chose to publicize comments and conduct that, until now, remained buried in private channels. The answer is simple. Because what happened to me wasn't just about one woman in one meeting. It was systemic, predictable, rehearsed. And if I didn't put spotlight on it, it would happen again to someone with less leverage, less visibility, someone who didn't have the tools to fight back." She paused, then added, "Now you've seen what your leadership really values. Not performance, not vision, appearance, conformity, familiarity. That ends today." The screen behind her flashed once more, now with a montage of public-facing commitments Belridge had made in recent years. Diversity pledges, inclusion statements, branded social posts featuring smiling employees of color. Then it contrasted those images with internal data leaks Danielle's team had compiled, demographic breakdowns showing a boardroom still 92% white, 100% male at the C-level, and a DI program with zero funding allocated in the past 2 quarters. The juxtaposition stung. People in the room shifted uncomfortably. Some refused to meet her gaze. Some, for the first time, looked ashamed. "You had every opportunity to embrace change," Danielle said, her tone never rising. "Instead, you built walls and called it culture. You erased voices and called it protocol. You buried truth and called it tradition. But now, the wall belongs to me, and I don't intend to keep it standing." She turned slightly, addressing Travis without ever using his name. "You wanted a company that looked like you. I want one that works for everyone." With that, she stepped aside and motioned for the moderator to continue with the official vote on Resolution 4C. The moderator, a man who had watched this entire exchange with the pale focus of someone witnessing an avalanche in slow motion, cleared his throat and called for a show of hands. The motion passed. Unanimously. Danielle didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She returned to her seat in the front row, folded her hands over her lap, and waited as the rest of the room struggled to reorient itself around the sudden, brutal clarity of a new reality she had orchestrated from the shadows. As the votes were tallied and the moderator confirmed the passage of Resolution 4C, murmurs cascaded across the room like ripples across a cracked mirror. Every eye had shifted, no longer toward Travis or the remaining members of the executive board, but toward Danielle, who now sat still and composed, her presence no longer just acknowledged, but inescapable. The moment carried an eerie calm, like the breath before a verdict. Then, with precise deliberation, Danielle stood again, stepped to the center of the stage, and faced the crowd not as a speaker, not as a partner, but as the new commanding force of the company's future. "Before we proceed to closing remarks," she said, her voice low but resonant through the hall's polished acoustics, "there's one final announcement I've been authorized to deliver on behalf of More Tech Collective." She paused for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for every voice to go silent again. Effective immediately, More Tech will begin the integration process to absorb Belridge Enterprises into its innovation architecture. This merger has been greenlit by all necessary regulatory channels, and our board of directors has voted unanimously to proceed. Belridge will operate as a strategic subsidiary, with full rebranding scheduled within the fiscal quarter. She stepped forward now, eyes locked on the first 3 rows, where Travis sat like a statue, his expression stretched thin and blank, and where Lauren Wells blinked rapidly, visibly trying to mask the panic settling into her frame. "However," Danielle continued, "this merger carries one condition. To ensure a clean and ethical transition, all current executive leadership listed in the September 30th roll, including CEO, COO, CFO, and CCO positions, are required to tender their immediate resignations within 72 hours. Severance packages will be honored, but no extensions or advisory roles will be negotiated. Leadership must evolve or step aside." An audible gasp pulsed through the back rows. The moderator looked toward Travis instinctively, but Danielle kept speaking. This isn't personal. It's procedural. For Belridge to survive, it must be rebuilt. And we cannot build on compromised foundations. She didn't need to say more. Everyone understood what the compromise referred to. Still, she turned slightly to the AV team and gave a subtle nod. The screen behind her flickered again, once, then twice, and then a video began to play. This one wasn't grainy, wasn't accidental, and wasn't hidden in whispered chat threads. It was a crystal clear recording, captured at a private investor dinner 4 months earlier, where Travis Kingsley had spoken too freely, unaware that one of the guests had chosen to document the evening for internal recaps. His voice filled the room now, played back through surround speakers for every shareholder, board member, and regional director to hear. The thing is, you can't just throw money at diversity and expect results, Travis was saying, swirling wine in his glass as he leaned in over white linen. I mean, be honest, how many of these women of color actually understand scale, compliance, regulatory risk? We've been in this game for decades. They're just chasing buzzwords and trying to look disruptive on TikTok. Laughter. Then more. A female voice had asked, half joking. So you're saying they don't get it? Travis replied with a smug smile. I'm saying they're trying to play a game they didn't invent and barely understand. This isn't retail. This is capital warfare. And trust me, they don't speak that language. The video stopped. No music played. No transition followed. Just silence, heavy and electric. Danielle turned back to face the room, and her words landed like hammer strikes on marble. This is the culture you've invested in. This is the mindset that's shaped your strategy. This is the leadership that has guided your futures. Ask yourselves, how much longer would that have worked? No one moved. No one dared. Travis's face remained still, but the vein pulsing at his temple betrayed the truth. He knew it was over. If I had made this decision in secret, some of you would have doubted it. If I had made it quietly, it might have been softened by PR language and polished excuses. But I chose to make it here, now, in front of you all, because truth deserves daylight. Transparency is not optional. And accountability, she added, locking eyes with Travis, is not a negotiation. She stepped back once more as her assistant, seated near the side of the stage, handed out updated merger packets to the moderator and legal counsel. A new transition chart appeared on screen behind her, names already grayed out, their titles marked vacating. Next to them were placeholder blocks labeled under selection equity vetted replacements. Danielle let that image sink in, then turned toward the shareholders one last time. I was once told, off record, that I didn't understand this business, she said, that I wasn't built for it, that I didn't speak its language. And yet here we are. You're watching a company I built rewrite the rules of an industry that told me I didn't belong. Not with noise, not with outrage, but with strategy, precision, and receipts. The moderator stood again, this time not to object, but to officially call for board confirmation of the merger terms. The votes came fast. No one opposed. A few abstained, but the result was locked within moments. Danielle stepped away from the mic, not smiling, not basking, but focused, composed, and prepared for what came next. As the board scrambled in hushed tones, and the very architecture of Belridge, its name, its power, its gatekeepers, began to collapse under the weight of its own refusal to evolve. The moment the board meeting adjourned and Danielle's exit conditions were approved, the consequences began unspooling with a velocity that even the most seasoned executives failed to anticipate. Travis Kingsley, once the impenetrable face of Belridge Enterprises, received a single folded envelope from the interim legal liaison. Inside it, a formal termination letter co-signed by the restructured investor committee and the incoming more tech-appointed oversight council. The language was brutal in its clarity. Effective immediately, Kingsley was relieved of all duties, barred from entering Belridge premises, and placed under internal investigation for discriminatory conduct and fiduciary misrepresentation. His access to company servers, communications, and trading platforms was revoked by 2 p.m. By 3:17, his executive badge failed to register at the main lobby entrance. By 4:05, His personal Belridge email account was archived and forwarded to the legal compliance team. But the most devastating blow came at 4:26 p.m. when the Securities Oversight Office was notified of a material ethics breach affecting governance transparency, triggering an automatic freeze on Kingsley's personal stock assets pending a full audit. The figure was staggering: over $48 million in locked equity, now inaccessible, illiquid, and suspended under suspicion of insider negligence. The financial media, hungry for blood, pounced immediately. Business News Global ran the headline: Belridge implodes, CEO ousted, racism scandal shakes industry. By the evening news cycle, Danielle's name was trending alongside clips of her speech, screenshots of a leaked video, and sharp-tongued commentary from industry analysts previously too timid to challenge Belridge's corporate dominance. The message was clear: the king had fallen, and the world was watching the ashes. Meanwhile, the damage rippled outward into Belridge's partner network. Within 12 hours of the video's public circulation, their two largest supply chain sponsors, Indigo Logistics and Nextwell Tech, issued formal press releases announcing a suspension of ongoing contracts. Indigo's CEO released a statement reading, "We do not tolerate or align with companies whose leadership reflects discriminatory values, regardless of past performance." Nextwell was even more direct: "No partnership is worth risking cultural integrity. We stand by our teams, our customers, and our future." Effective immediately, all Belridge affiliations are under review. That night, stock tracking platforms glowed red with Belridge's ticker symbol. A 14% drop in value by close of market. Another 9% in after-hours trading. Analysts called it a trust vacuum. A former board advisor called it a masterclass in executive self-destruction. And yet, Danielle didn't celebrate. She observed, measured, managed. Her transition team, working from a secured location offsite, activated their crisis management strategy not to save Belridge's name, but to salvage what could still be restructured under Morteca's ethical reinvention framework. Within the first 24 hours, they published a full transparency timeline on Belridge's official site, detailing every major decision point, every verified complaint, and every systemic failure that led to the collapse. The report included anonymized employee testimonies, third-party audit requests, and Danielle's commitment to building back with accountability at the center. The response was swift. Some investors pulled out, those who had never believed in change anyway. But many stayed, drawn by what they recognized as rare in the corporate world: a reckoning backed by receipts, led by someone who had been on the receiving end of the machine and still chose reform over revenge. Meanwhile, Travis's personal world crumbled in tandem. Former allies withdrew. PR firms declined to represent him. His attorney issued a cautious non-denial statement about ongoing review, while quietly advising him to prepare for potential civil litigation. Social media turned him into a case study. Threads unpacked his past interviews, dissected his boardroom quotes, resurfaced articles that once praised his uncompromising vision, and now read as ironic footnotes to his fall. But the most brutal fallout came from within. A group of junior analysts, mostly women and people of color, drafted an open letter titled, "We Were Always Watching," and published it anonymously on a popular business ethics forum. In it, they detailed the patterns of silencing, the coded language, the subtle penalties for speaking up. They wrote, "Travis Kingsley didn't destroy Belridge. He revealed what it always was when no one was looking." The letter went viral. And for the first time, mainstream business coverage didn't just quote Danielle. They started following her lead. Outlets stopped asking if her takeover was too aggressive. They began asking how more companies could follow suit. By day 2, over a dozen companies, including Belridge's closest competitors, sent internal memos reiterating their DEI commitments. Not because they believed them, because they didn't want to be next. Danielle continued her work without pause. In every interview, she remained calm, articulate, and focused on structure, not scandal. When asked how it felt to watch Travis fall, she replied only, "The system broke him long before I ever arrived. I just pulled back the curtain." In the background, Travis remained silent. No apology, No admission, just silence, and a shrinking shadow where once he had stood, unchallenged. Meanwhile, Belridge's valuation dropped another 6% overnight. Insurance underwriters re-evaluated liability risk. Government officials began probing the validity of past earnings calls where leadership had concealed internal complaints. Shareholders who once backed Travis began whispering Danielle's name not as a threat, but as a lifeline. Within 48 hours of her public reveal, the old empire was in ruins. And from those ruins, something else was starting to rise. 3 months after the public fallout, the dust around Belridge's transformation had begun to settle, not into silence, but into something more enduring, something that resembled rebuilding. The media storm had passed, the rebranding was underway, and Danielle had transitioned into a quieter role, not behind the curtain, but above the fray, overseeing strategic reintegration, while allowing newly appointed executives to implement reforms from within. Share prices began stabilizing, investor confidence ticked upward, and slowly, the narrative around Belridge shifted from collapse to correction. But even in stability, the echoes of the past hadn't vanished. One morning in mid-November, Danielle received a thin cream envelope, addressed in crisp cursive and bearing no company insignia. She recognized the sender's name before she even opened it, Travis Kingsley. She didn't rush to read it. She placed it on her desk, finished her calls for the morning, reviewed 2 acquisition memos, and only then, alone, coffee cooling beside her, she opened the letter and read its contents. It was brief, 2 pages. No excuses, no qualifiers, no branding language. Just words written in black ink, legible but visibly unpolished, like someone unused to putting vulnerability on paper. He began by acknowledging his silence, admitting that in the weeks following his removal, he had been consumed by shame, not of getting caught, but of finally being forced to see how deeply rooted his bias had been, masked by tradition, by success, by the applause of people just like him. He wrote, "When you stood on that stage, I wasn't angry, I was terrified. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding the story." He went on to share that he had entered a mentorship program for dismantling systemic leadership habits, and that he had enrolled in a peer-reviewed course designed for former executives seeking to rebuild trust through community investment. But what mattered most came in the 3rd paragraph. "This is not a plea for redemption," he wrote. "I don't expect you to forgive me, nor should you. But if there is a way forward for people like me, it has to begin with showing up unarmed and doing the work. I've committed the next 2 years of my life to supporting Black and Brown entrepreneurs through the Ground Up initiative. They've offered me a volunteer role, no title, no press, just labor. I asked them to name the program after someone who reminded me why it was necessary. They chose yours." Danielle read the line twice, then folded the letter slowly, not out of sentiment, but out of something quieter. Respect for the effort, not the man. She didn't write back, but she forwarded the letter to her impact team, with one note: monitor his commitment quietly. If he stays the course, fund a match. Meanwhile, change was happening in less expected places. Lauren Wells, the former CCO who once mimicked Danielle's accent with careless cruelty, had also vanished from headlines after the shakeup. Many assumed she had fled the spotlight out of self-preservation, but then, almost quietly, news surfaced of her involvement in a new philanthropic foundation. The announcement came not from her, but from a group of educators, the More Initiative, they called it, a scholarship fund for young Black women pursuing degrees in business, technology, and design. At first, Danielle suspected a publicity stunt, but then she saw the breakdown of the board. No Lauren on it, no press conferences, no brand alignment. Just a 3-page mission statement and a list of early recipients, students from underserved neighborhoods, first-generation college applicants, women who had already been told, in one way or another, that they weren't the right fit. When asked why she'd done it, Lauren gave no public comment, but a private message made its way to Danielle via an intermediary. It read, "You were never the problem. I was. This doesn't fix what I said, but it might help someone else survive it." Danielle didn't respond, but she made a personal donation that doubled the fund's first-year operating budget, attaching only one request: that each year, on the day of the scholarship awards, the recipients would be reminded not of her name, but of what they already carried within them. Change, she knew, was never instant. It was rarely dramatic. It didn't live in public victories or viral moments. It lived in the quiet choices, the unseen apologies, the uncelebrated reversals, the systems rewritten not with fanfare, but with steady, intentional hands. For Danielle, power had never been the endgame. Justice had, and not the punitive kind. The kind that built bridges from wreckage, that turned scars into roadmaps, that allowed even those who once failed to become part of a better future if they were willing to put in the work. From the corner of her new office, no longer in Belridge Tower, but in a newly converted warehouse, now serving as Morteca's East Coast headquarters, she looked out over the city skyline and considered everything it had taken to arrive here. Not just the strategy or the speech or the acquisition, but the endurance, the refusal to fold, the decision again and again to stay standing. She sipped her tea, opened a fresh document titled Next Cycle Legacy Structures Assessment, and began typing, her fingers steady, her vision clear, her story no longer hidden in someone else's narrative, but written wholly, undeniably, on her own terms. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment Danielle took the stage, or when the truth finally came to light? We'd love to know what surprised you most. Tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from today? If you want to see more stories that challenge power and rewrite the rules, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. More game-changing narratives are on the way. Stay tuned.